welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and hello to everyone watching this later on. My name is Marty Dagoberto. I'm the Policy Director here at NOFA Mass, and you are attending Organic as a Solution to the Climate Crisis with Steve Gilman and Maddie Kempner. Oh, and I don't have the bios in front of me because I have one device here. Maddie's the Policy Director at NOFA Vermont, and Steve is, geez, I don't have your.
Don't worry about it. We can do that.
Well, Steve's head of the Policy Council at the NOFA Interstate Chapter. I'll let them introduce themselves here because I'm working on limited devices. I don't have everything in front of me. I apologize. But before we jump into it, we do want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement and recognize that we are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. So we ask that folks please take a moment to find your location on this map and to recognize the names of the people whose land you now occupy. We'll drop a link in the chat there. The native land map is an incredible tool. You can see the names of the peoples that descend from folks who that was their ancestral land where we live now, and it's important for us to recognize and to put our work at NOFA Mass within the proper context. And we want to mention that there are a few ways that we seek to center racial equity in our work at NOFA, and a couple suggestions for how you can do that in your own work. One would be to assist BIPOC-led organizations such as the Urban Farming Institute, Gardening the Community, the African Alliance, and the Native American Rights Fund by sharing resources you have available, such as land, money, tools, and connections. Two would be to support legislation that will begin the talk and advance the work towards reparations. And three would be to protect the rights of farm and food workers. I'd like to include a quote here. We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetuated in the name of this country and make a commitment to uncovering that truth. That's an excerpt from Chief Sequan Pijaki, also known as Chief George Spring Buffalo. So just want to share a few norms here. We'll be making every effort to get questions you have answered during the workshop, but please feel free to use the chat feature to comment or ask questions during the workshop, and we'll pose your questions to the presenter throughout the session, or we'll be saving them at the appropriate time, and we'll offer if you'd like to ask the question yourself, but please do put those questions in the chat. Now to speak, simply click the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen, but please mute yourself when you're done speaking to avoid any background noise. And to save the chat, I'm sure there might be some good stuff happening in there. You can right click, there's on the chat box, there's 3 dots. You right click there and click the save chat option, and it'll download to your computer, most likely into your download folder. But also please note that this session is being recorded. We do want to thank our sponsors. We have a number of sponsors who help make our conference possible, and I encourage you to purchase from them. And when you do, let them know, that this is where you heard about their businesses. Please also take a moment to explore the virtual vendor marketplace, where there's a lot of great information and some generous discount codes for conference attendees. And most importantly, we want to thank you. Thanks to our members, and especially to our NOFA members who make our education and advocacy work possible. And please be sure to check out our NOFA Summer Auction. We have lots of amazing contributions from our sponsors and members. It's a really great set of items there you're going to want to check out. We're 100% virtual with this conference, but we're trying to maintain some of those elements that we love from the in-person conferences. Very much looking forward to get back in person, and we do want to recognize and support our sponsors who make this possible. So please do check that out. And at this point, I will turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves and share their presentation. So I'll stop share.
Okay.
Go.
Thank you, Marty. I'm just going to start off. I'll introduce myself. I'm Steve Gilman. I am the policy coordinator for the Interstate NOFA Policy Committee. And on that committee, there's representatives from all of the 7 chapters. Maddie?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Maddie Kempner, and I'm the policy director at NOFA Vermont, the Vermont chapter of NOFA. And then I also co-chair the NOFA Interstate Council Policy Committee. And I'm excited to chat with you all today about organic as a climate solution.
Great. So I'm going to start off. Let me just kind of give you a sense of how this workshop is going to flow today. It's basically in 3 parts, equal. I'll do the first part, which will be a little dire at the beginning, looking at the climate crisis and kind of the unfortunate industrial response to that so far. That'll be followed by Maddie. She'll have some backup slides and things, getting into actually the organic solution to what we're facing these days. And then the third part will be open to all the attendees. I urge you as we go along, so not to break the flow of things, you may want to have a question, but it could be answered in the next paragraph, to put it in the chat. Marty will handle those in the final 3rd section. And we're going to also open things up to a conversation, comments, discussion from everybody in the room. So I'm going to start off and just with a brief introduction that the climate crisis with organic agriculture as a mitigating solution has been on NOFA's policy agenda for some time now, as well as a major issue for our alliances. National Organic Coalition, Organic Farmers Association, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the National Family Farmers Coalition, the International Federation of Organic Movements, and the HEAL Alliance. So I'm going to start my 3rd with a quote from author and environmentalist Paul Hawken to get us started. Quote, "The climate movement will be the biggest movement in the history of humanity, not because somebody organized it or because there's a leader, some Martin Luther King. It's because of weather, pure and simple. It's because the science is going to change from conceptual to experiential." So to start with, I'm going to start off with a grim context of why all this is so important. The worldwide climate crisis is real and already upon us. The task now is to try and mitigate further effects. We're having to deal with stronger storms, increasing and more virulent hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, heat waves, prolonged cold snaps, and out of control fires that go way beyond weather anomalies. If we fail to keep global warming average temperatures increases from the pre-industrial levels to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and the poles and some other places have already crossed that line, the science shows the out of balance effects go from destructive to catastrophic, with increasing dire repercussions for everything we hold dear on this planet. Farmland certainly is a sitting duck for climate disruption. Just revisit what happened during the Dust Bowl days in the 1930s. Regular climate change impacts include increasing drought, flooding, high temperatures, freezing, wind, and fires. If global warming conditions keep accelerating, however, things can quickly get worse. The effects can set in motion crop failures, food supply breakdowns, farmer foreclosures, local business bankruptcies, and rural economic collapse. I told you this is dire. As the planet heats up, there's also increasing ocean warming and species displacement, leading to more acidification, glaciers melting, sea level rise, coastal flooding, and human destruction of the natural world. And the specter of failed farm economy makes possible food shortages, serious health effects, poverty and famine, leading to worldwide climate refugees, political upheavals, wars over resources, and worldwide depression. Thanks to indisputable science, denial is done. And thankfully, so is our sense of normalcy and business as usual. Human activities have already caused about 1 degree of global warming, and to some degree, with all the greenhouse gases already put in the atmosphere, average temperatures will keep rising. But this is not all a gloom and doom scenario if we take action. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, the scientists there see temperatures potentially being able to stabilize around the 1.5 Celsius mark if we can achieve real net zero emissions and get into net negative drawdown territory. The way forward to meeting our climate change targets is clear. In this ongoing corporate game where industries thrive because their toxic manufacturing costs are routinely externalized to the environment and never paid for, we're all losers. Surely coal, oil, and gas have to be left in the ground and their pollution ended, not just glossed over with self-perpetuating corporate marketing schemes. With plenty of major solar, wind, geothermal, heat pump, hydropower, and other energy alternatives at the ready, the shift to a much cleaner renewables is just waiting for political and economic green light. Industrial ag's feet also have to be held to the fire and replaced as well. Organic stands ready and able to restore a climate-friendly agriculture and be unleashed to effectively feed the world. The writing is on the wall for all to see. The climate action and economic imperative realities have aligned, and policymakers must now be pressured to support the necessary transformations to get us there. So, is there any good news? Yes. After years of industry-backed climate change denial and misinformation strategies that included derailing legislation in the Obama era and further impeding any advancements under the Trump administration, the federal government is finally stepping forward to address the existential threat of the planet's irrefutable climate emergency. With climate change now set as a full government priority, the Biden administration is also officially recognizing a major role for agriculture in removing displaced carbon dioxide from the atmosphere via soil carbon sequestration practices. And since building fertile, highly carbonaceous soil is at the heart of the holistic organic farming method, such acknowledgement would appear to highlight organic's role as an important solution to the climate crisis. But there's certainly plenty of bad news. Many of the same industrial megacorporations responsible for longtime greenhouse gas emissions are still in place as the nation's top policy power brokers. And in place of denial, they are now politically pushing a self-serving public-private partnership version of carbon trading. These carbon market financial instruments are aimed at setting the prices paid to farmers who take on additional practices for capturing and storing CO2 in their soils. The adoption of cover cropping, reduced tillage, and other soil sequestration techniques by large-scale farmers then generates a monetized credit that can be purchased by companies to offset their own continuing manufacturing discharges. In past years, big farmer organizations and corporations alike were very resistant to government-run cap and trade mechanisms. The popularity of this pro-business variation is that government takes on a monetarily supportive but non-regulatory role, The credit setting markets are run by private middlemen. Participating farmers receive an additional revenue stream, and the purchasing utilities, fossil fuel companies, and other pollutions are free to continue releasing greenhouse gases, as well as to proclaim their net zero status in so-called addressing the problem. And meanwhile, there's still a long road ahead for policymakers looking up to take organics' proven potential as a powerful, scientifically validated greenhouse gas mitigator. While some congressional supporters remain hard at work championing a sustainable organic soil health approach by way of a number of revitalized legislative initiatives, USDA remains firmly in Big Ag's camp. However, after the budget slashing blitz by conservatives during the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, there's now a resurgence of support for the climate-friendly working lands conservation programs by way of the existing programs that are also administered at USDA. The carbon market's gold rush. Not surprising in this new day of climate crisis awareness, such shiny carbon trading proposals can be facile formulas for redeeming the dirty industry image, along with corporate greenwashing. In January 2021, for example, Occidental Petroleum sold a 2 million barrel shipload of ballyhooed 100% quote carbon neutral unquote crude oil to India, completely offset by green payments, amounted to 65 cents per barrel, an oil selling for more than $60 a barrel. With the oil industry under more pressure from climate change regulators, investors and activists than ever before, their claims of removing an equal amount of greenhouse gases via sponsorship of typically unprofitable green projects are designed to bring in clear-cut protections for their toxic business as usual. Agricultural corporations and their industrialized cohorts are facing a similar greenhouse gas pollution cover-up problem. To this end, a well-organized group of big farming, environmental, and agribusiness organizations named the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, or FACA, has emerged as a major private sector player looking to get in on the action. Now with over 70 members, the ranks include American Farm Bureau, Bayer, Food Industry Association, Evangelical Environmental Network, Biotechnology Innovation Organization, McDonald's, and the Nature Conservancy, along with Syngenta, Cargill, and Archer Daniel Midlands. As a prime support of the Growing Climate Solutions Act in the Senate, they've put together a major legislative initiative with formidable bipartisan support pushed by Debbie Stabenow, a Democrat from Michigan, the powerful chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee. This bill provides governmental support for the privately initiated carbon credit markets approach by creating taxpayer funding USDA certification programs for the increasing number of carbon credit market traders and farmer technical assistance providers, as well as an increased advisory role for the farmers who voluntarily sign up to the corporately approved soil carbon sequestration practices on a per acre basis. A separate backup proposal is in the works with the USDA to establish a new $30 billion carbon bank under the discretion of Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack to provide further financial incentive payments for carbon sequestration on farms and forest lands. This newly touted anti-regulatory role for government, designed to do away with federal jurisdiction over agricultural polluting practices in favor of unleashing market cure-alls is designed to appeal to oversight adverse farmers and marketers alike. Their so-called win-win solution monetizes agricultural carbon sequestration by generating a cheap commodity price on carbon pollution that is emitted by US companies, hypothetically incentivizing them to reduce their greenhouse emissions while creating additional revenue stream for farmers who sign on to participate. However, there's many a detail lurking in the wings. Elusive solutions. A number of alternative agricultural organizations are cautious about directly going up against the mighty Senate Ag Committee's pet legislative initiative in order to retain a place at the bargaining table, and are pushing legislation and USDA to greatly expand the existing conservation programs instead. Other organizations support the conservation agenda, but are standing forthrightly against undertaking a false carbon markets approach. Since carbon market trading allows polluters to buy and sell permits to keep polluting instead of cutting greenhouse gas production at the source, detractors say these market scheme loopholes serve to benefit the industrial players and their government enablers who are looking to publicly position themselves as truly tracking the climate crisis. But detriments abound. There's a poor track record. The initial carbon markets starting up in 2010 failed to benefit farmers substantially or change farming practices. Monetizing agricultural practices leads to further consolidation of the larger farming operations that have the USDA credentials to participate. Private market middlemen traders take a percentage off the top. Polluting companies are allowed to continue their polluting operations at a low carbon commodity price assessment that is much less expensive than cleaning up their industrial processes. Environmental justice-wise, these industrial operations are often located near vulnerable and BIPOC communities who still receive the full brunt of the continuing allowable area toxic pollution. To date, there's no science in place to accurately measure soil carbon, leading to uncertain short-term and reversible gains that are difficult to quantify. With no reliable measurement tools for soil carbon permanence, how can we be sure that carbon markets will reward practices that are actually climate friendly? And who decides how much carbon is being sequestered and for how long? Since the carbon market companies will only pay for new carbon farming practices, early adopter and organic farmers who have been utilizing ongoing beneficial soil practices for years do not even benefit. Despite the moniker net zero, it does not cut emissions to zero. It trades indefinable carbon removal scenarios in exchange for the right to keep polluting. And quote, carbon neutral, unquote, falsely implies that carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas reductions can be met through carbon trading and pricey technological geoengineering fixes. Better legislative alternatives. Maddie will cover the current alternative, much more comprehensive bills that address multiple aspects of agriculture's role in the climate crisis. And that'll include the Agricultural Resistance Act from Shelley Pingree in Maine and the Climate Stewardship Act from Senator Booker in New Jersey. So the big picture, getting to net negative. There's no doubt we are surely involved in a profound planetary emergency. While agriculture can potentially put a dent in the atmospheric carbon dioxide buildup through bona fide carbon sequestration practices CO2 content remains as an intractable, long-lived greenhouse gas that persists in the atmosphere for millennia. And our annual emissions keep contributing to a further cumulative load. We actually need to get to net negative, not just stop adding more CO2 as a net zero goal, but actually remove it from the atmosphere to keep the long-term persistent global warming levels from getting any higher and further impacting our planet, ourselves, and our descendants. Meanwhile, other proprietary industry proposed carbon capture and storage technology solutions are unrealistic, expensive, and energy intensive. Depending on what gets counted, conventional agriculture generates some 14% of US agricultural anthropogenic CO2 emissions, including direct field production discharges, erosion, and deforestation, along with chemical fertilizer and pesticide manufacturing, machinery, energy use, and buildings, along with processing and transport. And all of these contributions must be dealt with to even begin to achieve net negative. But the IPP scientists caution that CO2 is not the only greenhouse gas that needs to be addressed and curtailed. Often expressed in terms of CO2 equivalents for global warming accounting purposes, methane and nitrous oxide emissions generate considerable impacts of their own. With oil and gas wellhead leakage, the major source, methane, CH4, persists in the atmosphere for decades and is 25% more virulent than CO2. With such a relatively brief duration, levels will fall off rapidly if it is successfully contained. Not so with nitrous oxide, N2O, emissions, chiefly from synthetic fertilizers, raw manure use, soil erosion, and nutrient runoff, which accumulates and lasts for centuries in the atmosphere and is over 300 times a stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, with persisting effects long after its sources have been limited. So I'm coming to the end here. Finally, it's important to realize that agriculture itself has been and is part of the climate crisis problem due to ongoing industrialized practices that have released large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere through cleaning forests, breaking sod, regular tillage, chemical fertilizer and pesticide use, and other regular conventional farming activities. So now, more than ever, it's important for conventional farmers to realize that tried and true beneficial farming practices that increase soil organic matter can really play an important role in climate change mitigation, while also providing many benefits for themselves. To achieve any real climate mitigation benefit, however, these practices must be ongoing, not just a yearly shift in a few practices to get carbon credit payments, as most of the carbon captured by improved farming practices would be released back to the atmosphere if those practices are discontinued. That's where organic agriculture comes in to lead the way, with continuing practices that build soil fertility as the basis for crop nutrition by sequestering atmospheric carbon in the soil long term. So now I'll turn things over to Maddie to present the organic solution to climate change approach. Take it away, Maddie.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much for that stage setting. I think that's an incredibly important place to start. I'm going to set up my screen share. I do have some slides for y'all. It's not the right Chrome window. Hold on. Although that might be interesting for you all. It's not the one that I wanted to share with you. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Hold on just a second. The close out of presenter view. Okay, let's try this again. All right. All right, can everybody see that okay? And hear me okay? Awesome. So I would love to talk to you all about some of the ways that we can advocate for organic as a meaningful climate solution, in contrast to some of what's being talked about, at the federal level in particular right now. Because I do think there are some real solutions ahead of us, both in terms of, agronomic solutions and also policy solutions. So to start out just with this baseline, which, Steve covered already a little bit, it's really important before we get into talking about, policy solutions that center organic as a climate solution, to really understand what those principles and practices of organic agriculture are, that make it a climate-friendly farming solution to climate change. And some of the things that, Steve already touched on, basically all organic principles or all organic practices, stem from principles that value healthy soil as the foundation of organic agriculture, and really take, as opposed to kind of an inputs-based approach, a whole systems approach that is based on an understanding of ecological function and creates overall resiliency. And so some of those practices that I've listed here include, I'm sure this is not new to any of you, but cover cropping, which is a great way to retain moisture in the soil, build soil organic matter, crop rotation, which is a really, excellent alternative to chemical use for managing pests and diseases on a farm. And also is great for, soil carbon sequestration and building a healthy soil biome, supporting biodiversity below and above ground, raising animals on pasture, which we know can have significant carbon sequestration impacts in the positive sense. Also organic agriculture does not allow the use of synthetic fertilizers, which, as Steve mentioned, nitrous oxide is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so the elimination of those fertilizers from organic agriculture really just cuts the impact of organic ag on greenhouse gas emissions in a huge way. And then, the fact that organic agriculture doesn't allow certain toxic pesticides, which also have significant greenhouse gas implications, both from their manufacture and, production to their use on the land. So these are just some of the ways to sort of set the foundation that organic agriculture really provides an agronomic solution to climate change, sort of as it is. I also wanted to touch on something that I think is really often left out of these conversations, especially at the federal level, but I really think it's critical that we also recognize the role that organic agriculture can have in supporting community resilience as well. Because the climate solutions are not just happening at the ground level. They're not just agronomic solutions. People have to be a part of this conversation and a part of the solution. And so really there are all these exciting ways also that increasing expansion of organic agriculture can actually make our communities more resilient. And I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but the basic point is, organic farmers rely on their own skill and experience and knowledge of ecological processes and biological processes to have successful farming operations. And by increasing the amount of organic acreage we have, I really think, we diversify our production systems, which is always a good thing to do when you're thinking about resilience. Diversity is key in terms of the types of farming operations that we have, the actual people working the land and their own knowledge and background that they bring to it. And then that really, as a whole, just fosters much greater community resilience, gets more people on the land, which I think is critical in terms of a climate solution. A lot of these schemes that Steve is talking about at the federal level, a lot of the type of farming that, I think will potentially benefit from carbon markets is really based on a commodity approach to farming, which centers and values really like reducing the number of people that are on the land in favor of more inputs, more equipment, more industrialization, as opposed to diversification and more hands on the land. So organic agriculture, I think, really has so much potential to be a solution in terms of community resilience and just expanding agricultural knowledge. So I'm going to go through a few different ways that I think policy can specifically be used to support organic agriculture as a climate solution. And the first thing I wanted to touch on, which is a great follow on to Steve's discussion, is federal policy. So, and before I get into a couple of the bills that Steve mentioned that we think are much more beneficial than the Growing Climate Solutions Act, I think it's important that we recognize, that there are currently some shortcomings within organic agriculture and enforcement of the organic standards at the federal level. So before I think we're able to say that organic agriculture is reaching, its full potential in terms of being a climate solution, we really need Congress and USDA to act to fully enforce the organic principles that are codified in the Organic Foods Production Act, which is the bill that, or the legislation that originally created the National Organic Program. So a few key rules, we talk about this so often in the policy space, but a few key rules that desperately need to be finalized in order for organic agriculture to meet its climate healing potential include some of the ones I've listed here. The origin of livestock rule, which has to do with how organic dairy animals are transitioned from conventional to organic production. Right now, there's a really significant loophole that allows producers to be continuously transitioning conventional animals into organic production, as opposed to what was intended to be sort of a one-time whole herd transition at the beginning of the National Organic Program. There's a rule called the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule, which really has a lot to do with fraud prevention, particularly with regard to operations overseas. And that was really spurred by the discovery of a lot of organic fraud happening in grain imports coming in from Eastern Europe. And the Organic Livestock and Poultry Practices Rule, which has to do with, the shorthand for that one is the Organic Animal Welfare Rule, which has to do with the way that animals are raised on organic farms, and in particular would outlaw the use of second-story screened-in cement floor porches as acceptable outdoor access for poultry, which currently is allowed and is a loophole that's used by some certifiers and some producers, which really I don't think meets the expectations of what consumers want when they're purchasing, especially organic eggs. So good news on the origin of livestock and the Organic Livestock and Poultry Practices Rule is that USDA has, in the case of the origin of livestock rule, actually announced that they are reopening. They did reopen that comment period for, I think, the third time since it was originally put forward in 2015. And so folks were able to comment on that, and they are going to move forward with a final rule in the coming year or so. And they have recently announced that they are also reopening comments and will be implementing some version of the Organic Livestock and Poultry Practices Rule, which is really, frankly, great progress, long overdue, but great progress in terms of strengthening some of these enforcement issues. And then finally, we would love to see NOP better enforcing pasture requirements for dairy animals, and the requirement that is in OFPA currently that requires producers to use specific practices to foster soil fertility. And if that was enforced, it would mean that hydroponic operations would now be allowed to be certified. So all of that is a very long way of saying we have some work to do to get organic agriculture really back to where it should be in terms of enforcement and integrity before it can be the climate solution that we believe it can be. So a couple of the bills that I think would help to move us in this direction at the federal level. The first is the Agricultural Resilience Act. I am going to make these slides available to you all. I know this is a lot of text to try to take in all at once, so just know that this is being recorded, and also these slides will be available if you want to really read through this in more detail. But these are some of the things that the Agricultural Resilience Act would focus on. One is really establishing that net zero target for agriculture nationally by 2040, quadrupling funding for food and agricultural research by 2040. It really focuses on the soil health principles and other organic principles in its sort of implementing language, or its initiating language. It increases funding for USDA climate hubs. It funds public seeds and breeds research, which is a really important initiative that essentially makes the research around plant and animal breeding more publicly funded, so that there can be seeds and breeds research that's much more accessible and useful to producers in different parts of the country, and for organic producers in particular. It makes it really important reforms to key programs like commodity crop insurance, EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, which is the Conservation Stewardship Program, which are two of the, I think, best potential conservation programs that we currently have at the federal level for addressing climate change. It specifically calls for increasing funding for the Organic Certification Cost Share Program, which, for anybody who's not familiar, is a program that provides reimbursement for producers to cover a pretty significant portion, especially if you're a smaller mid-size operation, of your organic certification fees. And then it also, and this is one that my nerdy policy heart is very excited about, creates an alternative manure management program, which really incentivizes alternatives to liquid manure storage on dairy farms, including composting of manure and bedded packs, which we know are much better in terms of emissions, and also much better in terms of soil health, animal health, and just overall ecological impact. Next is the Climate Stewardship Act, which was originally introduced by Senator Cory Booker, who is, very excitingly now on the Senate Agriculture Committee at the federal level, and is also kind of in our network in terms of the NOFAs collectively, since he represents New Jersey. The Climate Stewardship Act has a really cool feature that it establishes a soil health equipment grants program. So it's really focused on providing infrastructure that farmers need to improve their soil health. And it also has a lot of things in it that are somewhat similar to the Agricultural Resilience Act in terms of increasing funding for food and agriculture research. It increases funding for a program called LAMP, which is the Local Agricultural Markets Program that really focuses on supporting local food systems, which I think really goes hand in hand with supporting organic agriculture specifically. We really need to focus on supporting local food systems to really, boost those community resilience benefits that I was talking about earlier. It increases funding for EQIP and CSP, those same two programs I just mentioned, as well as adding specific climate stewardship and soil health practices to the eligibility for those programs. And then also critically, it prioritizes and creates set-asides for socially disadvantaged producers to be able to access conservation programs, which is a really exciting provision in that we know oftentimes as much as these conservation programs are a positive and really, at least attempt to move agriculture in the right direction, the folks that are accessing them are often those who are, well-resourced and have people who already have an existing relationship with their FSA office, or who have, staff who can go through the process of doing that paperwork, which can be kind of intense. So those set-asides for socially disadvantaged producers, I think, are really exciting as part of that legislation. And then finally, in terms of federal policy, funding organic certification cost share, like I mentioned earlier, and providing specific support for producers that are interested in transitioning to organic are additional ways that federal policy could be shifted to better support organic agriculture. And I don't, maybe folks are aware of this, but in 2020, USDA very unfortunately announced cuts to the organic certification cost share program in the middle of the pandemic. It was just terrible timing for organic producers. Whereas previously the organic certification cost share program covered up to $750 per scope, meaning production type. So if you have, say a dairy operation and a maple operation, you could get $750 reimbursed for your certification fees for each one of those scopes, or up to 75% of your certification fee. That was the previous reimbursement rate. In 2020, USDA announced that basically because of an accounting error on their part, that they were cutting certification down to $500 per scope, or up to 50% of certification fees. So it's critical to begin with that we just at least restore organic certification cost share to previous levels. That's a program that organic producers have really come to rely on, and that is particularly important for small and mid-sized producers for whom that $750 covers a really significant portion of their expenses. And then better yet, we would love to see actually those reimbursement rates increased beyond the previous levels of 750 or 75%. And the Agricultural Resilience Act, as I mentioned, would do that. And then finally, we would love to see specific certification cost share funds provided for producers in transition. That would be a great way to help close the gap when a producer is transitioning to organic. Oftentimes, say on a livestock farm, your feed costs go up significantly, oftentimes double if you are switching from conventional, or non-GMO to organic feed. That costs significantly more. And in the meantime, during that transition period, those producers are not reaping, the higher pay price that you can get at market for certified organic meat or eggs or dairy, whatever it is. So for that certification cost share to be provided to transitioning producers can really alleviate some of that additional cost that they're facing when they're in transition, and hopefully encourage more people to do that. So recently, in other really welcome good news, USDA recently announced a one-time pool of $20 million to help fund organic certification cost share and support transitioning producers in particular. So it does seem like this administration has an eye on that issue and is really looking for ways to support organic producers much more so than the previous administration was. So state policy, there are a lot of opportunities for organic agriculture to be supported as a climate solution at the state level as well. These are a bit more nuanced since, every state's scenario and every state's sort of, trajectory in terms of planning for climate action is a little bit different. But to begin with, most Northeast states have released or are in process of developing climate action plans, which is really exciting and provides a huge opportunity for organic agriculture to be centered. Many, if not all of these, include kind of a natural and working lands element that specifically addresses the working landscape, meaning farms and forests, as part of the climate solution. And some of the things that we're advocating for climate action plans to include, as Steve mentioned, really making sure that where we are providing support for specific farming practices, making sure that those support existing organic producers and early adopters, as opposed to just, paying dividends to folks who, are currently not maybe using best management practices and have a long way to go. We obviously need a little bit of both, but the focus, I would say, currently in terms of NRCS funding at the federal level is really on addressing resource concerns. So a lot of the existing conservation programs that we already have are well situated to kind of bring those bad actors, for lack of a better term, up to speed, as opposed to supporting sort of folks who were early adopters and who have been doing these practices all along. And it's really critical, I think, that they don't get left behind. In addition, we do want to see incentives for conventional producers to transition to organic practices. And then lastly, I would add, particularly in reference to our climate action plan that's currently in development here in Vermont, we really want to see outside of the box solutions. Because our Global Warming Solutions Act, and this is the case, I think, in quite a few states, sets really clear and specific emissions reduction targets. There is propensity for, the same old solutions like covering manure pits, for example, to really get a lot of the funding and attention in the natural and working lands element of climate action plans, because they're seen as, really mitigating significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions, which is clearly important. But if all we do in our climate action plan is put a bunch of caps on liquid manure pits, we're really not moving our agriculture in this, positive direction that's going to provide resiliency long term. And then secondly, there is an exciting opportunity, especially here in Vermont. In 2019, Vermont created a soil health and payment for ecosystem services working group, which NOFA Vermont has a seat on, representing small scale diversified agriculture. It's currently in the process of sort of assessing the effectiveness and the reach of existing conservation programs, among other things, sort of defining soil health and looking at, economics and financing of a payment for ecosystem services program. So A few of the things that we have been advocating for in that process here in Vermont is, again, making sure that we're not leaving behind producers already using organic practices, ensuring that biodiversity is included as an ecosystem service that can be compensated for. I think especially because we have pretty substantial water quality challenges here in Vermont, in addition to dealing with climate impacts that are impacting everyone, there is a lot of propensity here in Vermont to focus on these other three benefits that I outlined: carbon sequestration, flood mitigation, and water quality. And my concern personally is that if we are not addressing biodiversity, again, organic producers are going to be left behind, and we're going to have a much more narrow scope in terms of practices and approaches to, really responding to the climate crisis and our, ecological decline in total. And if we focus only on carbon sequestration and flood mitigation and water quality, I think the reach of this program is going to be a lot more narrow, and we risk, moving further in the direction of, just funding manure injection, for example, because that's seen as, potentially a water quality benefit, as opposed to funding diverse crop rotations and diverse cover crops and things like that that really also address biodiversity. So, and then finally, it's critical, obviously, both in climate action plans and in this payment for ecosystem services process, that the outcomes be developed in close collaboration with the farming community, the forestry community, and other land stewards. And I should say here also that we as states and as nonprofits make a concerted effort to deeply engage underserved and, communities that generally aren't reached by these types of bureaucratic processes, like the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, for folks that aren't familiar with that term, and Indigenous communities in particular, because their knowledge really is the basis of a lot of where these organic practices come from to begin with. So we can't, skip over these communities and assume that we're going to come out with holistic solutions if we just have a bunch of, state bureaucrats and even nonprofit employees in the room who aren't deeply familiar and in relationship with the land every day. So, oh, and I should say also, just in closing about this payment for ecosystem services potential, it's very exciting. As far as I know, Vermont is the only state that specifically has a working group dedicated to setting up a PES program currently. But through the process of being involved in this, which we have been for going on 2 years now, it's really clear to me that, other states throughout the country, in particular in the Northeast, are really watching Vermont to see kind of what we come up with in terms of a payment for ecosystem services program. So it feels critical that we really get it right, or do, as good a job as we possibly can setting up this program, because I think it could potentially set a precedent for action in other states going forward. And then part 3, which we're going to open it up for questions and discussion, really we want to hear your ideas about how policy can be changed to support organic as a climate solution, and any questions that you have about the things that I have talked about or what Steve addressed earlier. So I'll stop sharing and we can open it up. And I want to invite everybody, as you're comfortable, to please turn on your video so we're not talking to a bunch of black screens.
Thank you for that, Maddie, and thank you both, Maddie and Steve, for that. Serious download there. It's certainly a sobering topic, and necessarily so. We've sort of been collectively drunk for a few hundred years on these topics, and we need to sober up, and we need to admit we have a problem, and we need to make amends and work through those steps. Right? That's how I think about it. It's great to have folks here in this conversation. Thanks again. If you are comfortable coming on screen, it'd be great to see folks. Welcoming any, this is our discussion part of the workshop here. I don't see any questions yet in the chat. If folks do have any clarifying questions or anything for our presenters, feel free to come off on screen or open your mic. But if there aren't any clarifying questions, we certainly, of course, also just welcome discussion. What did you hear or see in this presentation? that you feel like we should be underscoring, or that you see as a step for our movement to increase the prominence of organic solutions in the climate conversation. Anyone have anything to share? You know, I can talk. I'll be happy to give my thing.
I have one question for Maddie.
Yeah, sure. Steve, go ahead.
Tell me about your graphics on that presentation. That was really well done.
That is so funny. I knew somebody was going to ask about that because they are beautiful, and they're actually done by an illustrator who we hired recently to do a bunch of illustrations for our website overhaul. And I will find her name for you and share a link in the chat to her work.
Oh, it's just really well done. They
Thank you.
have a real quality to them. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you appreciate them. I'll find her name and put it in the chat for anybody who wants to look her up.
Yeah, certainly having those cultural elements, the arts, ways to reach people, you know, not through their minds, but through their hearts on this topic. And I know it's easy to get caught up in sort of a left brain analysis of the problem and what are the solutions we can line up and the policies we can put in place. And that's a absolutely instrumental and important part of the conversation. And I think a part that often gets overlooked, you know, and I'm speaking as someone who came from the youth climate movement back in the power shift 07, 09 days. I've very much been through the cycles of depression and despair when it comes to the climate crisis. And I've really trying to, you know, surrender and basically move beyond the cycle of hope. And
lost my house keys there.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna looks like we got. I'm gonna go mute Michael there. Rather than being stuck in this cycle of hope and despair, I was watching a good video with Joanna Macy, a keynote that she gave a couple of years ago, and she talks a lot about the deep ecological approach toward the great turning of how we're going to turn things around. And, you know, she says, you know, you don't ask Frodo if he has hope on his way to Mordor, you know, and it really, it's irrelevant. It's we have work to do. And so my question for our panelists and for anyone else here is like, what fuels you in this work, and how do you see, you know, the emergence of organic agriculture and the various, you know, cultural elements that surround organic agriculture playing in part of this shift in consciousness that's going to be necessary to get through this point? Because, you know, we have our problems, we have our solutions, but we also have to change the way that we're thinking as a society about our relationship to each other and the planet. And I do feel that the organic movement has been a laboratory and a nexus, a collection point for people, bringing, you know, reinvigorating ancient worldviews and bringing forward new synthesis of how we understand our relationships. That I know I personally gain a lot of inspiration from my friends and allies in the organic movement. So I'm just curious, again, for our panelists and anyone else who'd like to contribute, like what is fueling you, and how do you see the organic vision, in addition to the practices, playing a role in addressing the climate crisis?
Steve, you want to go first? Do you want me to?
I would just say, you know, one thing is that I feel really blessed to be in a community that has a deeper understanding of what's possible. To me, just experiencing what's going on now even more daily, and looking at what's going on around the world on a daily basis, there's just no question that we really have to take giant steps really quickly. And so what else is there to do? And I do feel blessed that we have a community that does have solutions, that does have an answer. And these have been tried and true. They've been in place for a long time. And so that means to me that it's incumbent upon us to take a leadership role in all this. And, you know, I think that's where organic really can stand. And in particular, our coalition, National Organic Coalition, has been raising this flag high for everyone to look at. We had a fly-in earlier this year in the spring to Capitol Hill. It was virtual. And right there at the top of the list was getting organic written into being a solution for people to look at. And that's one reason why I went into some of the depth with FACA and this whole industrial approach that is keeping their blinders on. They don't want to have their ox be gored, but it's very clear that we really have to get off the fossil fuel economy if we're all going to survive as a planet. So again, I'm just really thankful to be part of this community.
Yeah, I think for my part, Marty, what you sort of said at the end of your comments there about just the vision that organic agriculture can create is really what keeps me going. I think it's really important to have an understanding of of where we are and all the sort of pitfalls in our commodity industrialized ag system in order to, really push back against those. But I also think it's really critical that we spend a lot of time as a community really visioning, what the future does look like that we want to see, how it's different, how we get there, and spending time, building relationships with one another. As I think that's really like a critical role that all of the NOFAs individually as chapters and collectively play, is making sure that we feel like we are in relationship with people who share these values and this vision. So that's one thing. I think just sense of community and sense of vision, and that is what kind of gives me purpose in terms of moving forward. I love to imagine, and I'll just share, an example, and it's very particular to my community, and this can look different everywhere, but I live in a small town in northern Vermont where we have a really vibrant, we have a lot of really, thriving organic farms right in our neighborhood, and they really interact with the rest of the community in incredible ways. For example, we have like a little natural food store, and even our local general stores, which are really like community hubs in a lot of rural towns, supply, some of the produce and things that come from these local organic farms, and prioritize that, so it's kind of accessible to everyone. They also are really key in, we have a really strong mountain biking community where I live, and a lot of the trailheads actually are organic farms. And so you pull up to an organic farm when you're going mountain biking, and they have a farm stand that you can support, and then the farmers that I get a CSA from, for example, buy their mountain bikes from our local mountain bike shop, and the mountain bike shop is a CSA member there. And there's just this like really interwoven community that shares these values, and that again is just what that happens to look like in my community. That's not what it's going to look like everywhere, but I think that having this image of sort of really how organic farms can be an integral part of a small community like mine is really inspiring to me, and I would love to just find ways for that to be able to be the case everywhere. And we need to make a lot of changes in policy in order for these farms to survive, because it's not easy to do.
Wow. Yeah, thank you both for that. And I totally hear, the community aspect, the community building aspect of local agriculture, of organic agriculture. I agree. I certainly see that as a critical part of the shift in consciousness that we need in order to get through these times. And and just to answer my own question, I guess, but to add to it, the culture within the organic community of seeking to understand the balance between the human and non-human world, and the web of life that we are a part of, I think is absolutely instrumental for the cultural shift necessary. And organic gardeners and farmers have that hands-on practice of relating to the earth community that I think is going to be increasingly important. So thank you to everyone who's a farmer and everyone who works with the soil, a gardener, compost enthusiast. We are all taking part in that important third piece of the great turning of the consciousness shift that's absolutely necessary to address the climate crisis. So
Hey,
thank
Mark,
you.
can I just
Yeah.
say one more thing on that before
Please.
you move on? I also really want to say, I think in terms of this shift in consciousness, I touched on this just a tiny bit in my presentation, but I think it's really exciting to me that we as an organic movement are starting to realize that like these ideas are not ours alone. And the wisdom of, you know, our elders who have been farming in like this kind of relatively white, you know, organic farming movement is critical and is such an excellent foundation. But I think the fact that we are starting to recognize as a community that this this knowledge really stems back, it goes back much further and goes back to indigenous populations that really had a whole different relationship and way of farming or working with the land to sustain their communities. That's really exciting to me that we're starting to recognize that. And I hope that the organic movement can find, you know, ways to sort of stop seeing this so much as like our work to carry forward, but something like a broader collective vision that we are just one part of. Because I think in doing that, we can build this coalition that includes, you know, not only, you know, certified organic producers who have been doing this on their family land for generations, but, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have also carried this knowledge through many, many generations. And, you know, who we really need to be lifting up and acknowledging and bringing into, you know, some of the things that I think, you know, particularly like white people have access to, like land and capital that unfortunately a lot of other communities have been cut out of. So it's just, I think there's just so much potential in this moment. And I think that recognition is really exciting to me.
Powerful, powerful. Thank you so much for that, Maddie. Absolutely critical to recognize, you know, where we are in the bigger picture, and certainly the organic movement is just a slice of that, and we're building off of generations of wisdom. So thank you for that, Maddie. We do have a question from Vivian coming into the chat from Maddie. She says, do you interact with local agricultural commissions in developing and advancing your advocacy, or with other local town or nonprofit groups? Do you see potential for future collaboration with ag commissions?
Yeah, I love that question. You know, personally, my advocacy work, and this is probably, well, maybe this isn't true at all the NOFA chapters, I'm not sure. My advocacy work really happens primarily right now at the state and federal levels, mostly just for reasons of capacity. It's hard for us to do a lot of work at the town to town level. But I do think there is a really critical role for those local groups in shifting, you know, like we're talking about the consciousness and the policies at the municipal level to support better farming practices. And I'll just share, you know, one way that I can see municipal groups or, you know, food policy councils or local ag commissions coming into this conversation. For example, in the Payment for Ecosystem Services working group that I'm a part of, we are starting to have conversations around I guess I would term it as like avoided costs. So the more we can sort of invest in land-based solutions to the climate crisis, the more we can avoid really substantial costs that we are facing every year in terms of fixing infrastructure like roads and bridges that just wash out year after year. And I'll share just quickly, you know, we had back 2 years ago in 2019, they spent in our town, I don't know how many millions of dollars, but I live on this road that's along the river. And there's, you know, cornfields and there's agriculture all along the river there on the road, some of whom, you know, aren't really, they're not cover cropping. They, you know, they cut their corn and then there's just bare soil there. And so it floods every year and all that soil is washing off into the river. And so because it floods pretty regularly, they spent millions of dollars to raise the road by 3 feet. And this was in October of 2019. It probably finished in early to mid-October of 2019. And then folks may remember there was massive, like 500-year flooding that happened around Halloween of that same year. And it flooded right up over that road that they had spent millions to raise by 3 feet. And to me, that's just, it always stands out in my mind of this, like, you know, similar to our sort of Western medicine philosophy, right? Where we treat the symptom and not the cause. We're just constantly going to be pouring money into, you know, fixing these problems rather than investing in sort of the upstream solutions to them. And so I say that just to say, I feel like everybody around town that day and in the, you know, weeks following that big flood, all anybody could talk about was how much money that, you know, they and we collectively had just spent to raise that road up and how it just flooded up over it anyway. And I can just imagine harnessing all of this like local understanding of, you know, of the impacts of climate change into those kind of upstream solutions and support for them. And I think that's a really critical role that like local ag commissions and food policy councils can help play.
Wow, fantastic. That gave me a lot to think about, certainly as the NOFA Mass Policy Director. I know that we've been wanting, we work with a few ag coms and the conservation districts, and definitely having the local feedback, like the shorter feedback loops for local solutions. I definitely agree that those who are best suited to fashion and implement climate solutions are the people local to that area and who understand those systems. So that's a really great point. Thank you, Maddie. And thank you for that question, Vivian.
And conservation districts is a great thing to add to that, Marty. I think we
right.
work with conservation districts in our work quite a bit, and they have an incredible amount of knowledge in terms of their work on the ground with producers, and also in terms of their, you know, just their resources and connection with NRCS. And that's definitely a resource that I think goes overlooked sometimes.
Cool. So do we have any other questions? I did have a thought about coalition building and thoughts, but looks like we got over on Al's screen there. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in our area, that we have one of our board members has emphasized the need to have scientific research or / academic research to back up the our you know, our enthusiasm about organic agriculture, say sequestering carbon. You know, the other parts are more obvious, like the cover crops and you know, improving the absorbability of soil, but you know, more technical aspects. And I've been wondering, and I confess, since I got vaccinated, I've been doing a lot of traveling, so I've been guilty of being out of the loop. But are there one or two newsletters or I'm just blogs or professors that are you know, zeroing in on the research that we need that prove our so-called claims and our sources of enthusiasm? Because now our board member just stressed that, you know, if you won't get very far in convincing the general public if you don't have good scientific and academic research to back up what you're trying to tell people. Mm-hmm. So, who can help me out on that question? If I spend as much time as I should on this, I might have already come up with the answers. But
that's a very important question. I'll say I've been asking similar questions when I hear people making, you know, claims about whatever new methodologies that are going to be the big thing. I want to know, for the skeptic, how can we convince them, and where can we point to some subjective science? So Maddie, Steve, do you have any go-to resources you would recommend?
You know, I would say, just from my personal experience, Soil for Climate has quite a compendium of resources, and I'll just say Carl Tiedemann is one of the founders of that organization, and I was on a webinar with him a few weeks ago where I was asking for specific research, especially around the link between climate mitigation and soil carbon sequestration and soil biology, which I think often gets, again, like left out of the conversation. And he followed up with me via email personally with, you know, like 4 to 6 videos and papers and lots of resources. So I would say that's one go-to that I would check out, is Soil for Climate. It's the number 4 in the middle. So that's one suggestion.
And was there a particular individual you just mentioned?
Yeah, the person that I mentioned, his name's Carl Tiedemann. But I think if you go to their website, you know, they have a lot of resources available there, or you can find, you know, ways to contact the folks specifically that are part of that. Yeah.
For a while, there was quite a bit of research going on at Cornell, if I have it right. And you know, probably a specific research, maybe organic research projects there. I'm getting rusty on that. Is there much coming out of Cornell right now, or?
I think there's most of the universities now are really having to dedicate time and money to these questions. And there certainly is deeper and deeper ways to go. I keep going back to Mark Schonbeck, who is an old friend of NOFA. He's down in Virginia, and he works for NSAC, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and for OFRF, the Organic Food Research Association. And he is a scientist who is probably at this point not published widely, but is being supported in digging deeper into this whole issue, particularly with agriculture and organic agriculture. And some of the things he's coming up with, really we need to pay attention to. There's no doubt that organic practices over the long run can really sequester carbon in the soils for more of a permanent basis. But then he'll come up with research that says, but in coastal Georgia, sandy soils, maybe the best you can hope for with the best agricultural practices that you could put to use, maybe the best you could hope for is not to lose any more carbon. And so that's one of the problems with making a blanket statement to cover the whole world or the whole country or the whole state, is that there's so many variations inside. And that's another whole problem with the carbon markets approach, is that they want to do a one size fits all, and it doesn't. And so I think we have to progress. And I think the Cornell question is really important, because we here in New York State, particularly NOFA New York, likes to work closely with Cornell, but also keep their feet to the fire. And when something on GMOs comes through from them, to really stand up publicly and say, wait a minute, what's your basis for this other than you're getting a lot of money from Monsanto? So that's the other thing we have to look out for. All these entities are responsive to support from other entities. And this is one of the long-term problems that we continually find ourselves in. I am hoping that we can get some of Mark Schonbeck's, he's done some work for NSAC that I think we can get circulated in NOFA that's very interesting and really gives heart to the organic direction. Good question.
I just want to say too, I want to echo Marty's suggestion in the chat of Rodale. They're definitely a great go-to resource. Rodale also, and I'll say this about some of these other entities too, Rodale does an amazing job, especially if you sign up for their e-newsletter, of not only providing research, and they have, as a lot of people probably know, like a long-term systems trial comparing conventional organic practices, they also do a great job of telling the story in a really compelling way, and in a simple way that's like, they put out this newsletter, and I'm always sending it to our marketing director to say, like, here's how we talk about organic as a climate solution, because we can sometimes get too in the weeds. And to your point, Bunny, there's sometimes people really want that research and they want to dig into an academic paper. And sometimes you have to tell the story in a way that's more accessible to the general public. And I think Rodale is an example of an organization that does both really well. And then I just also put a link in there to Project Drawdown, which really covers climate solutions in a much more holistic sense, but they've also done a lot around ag and land-based solutions. That's high quality research.
Yeah, I did recently, sometime in the last few months, I went to that Project Drawdown website, and the board member that in New Jersey that brought up about the need for academic papers. I think her point was that we all love Rodale, and I would say there's nothing wrong with their research, but she pointed out that the academics want stuff from the universities, the colleges, and so that's the kind of the downside of Rodale. Although I think that they are coordinating more with at least the Delaware Valley, well, whatever it's called now, the Delaware College, and there might be some other academic institutions that they're coordinating with now. Hard to keep up with all of it.
Yeah, it is.
So we have another interesting question in the chat here from Vivian, which, yeah, I probably don't have ample time to get into. It's a complicated dynamic, but she asked, on the state level, Maddie, do you ever find common interests with the Vermont Farm Bureau Federation? And Steve, do you see any possibilities on the national level?
That, Vivian, is such a good question. It's a fascinating topic, actually. So here in Vermont, the president of the Farm Bureau here in Vermont is an organic producer, and actually is the farmer who I was referring to, whose farm is our kind of the trailhead of our local mountain bike hub. So that's a kind of a fun fact. And so but essentially our approach, we still don't agree about everything, because the Vermont Farm Bureau, still is part of the national organization. So we definitely have areas where we disagree with them at the state level. And so we've sort of, basically our approach is to try to maintain a good relationship with them and find the areas that we can constructively work together. And, a significant number, I would say, of organic producers here in Vermont that are part of the Farm Bureau membership. And so we try to work together as much as possible where we do overlap on things. And then there are definitely plenty of issues where we sort of just have to agree to disagree and try to not work at cross purposes with one another. But we have had some interesting conversations over the past several years with the local chapter president, who has brought forward policies to the national level in support of, for example, disallowing hydroponic certification from organic. He actually brought that forward to the federal Farm Bureau conversation. And I think at least, I'm not sure if it's still there, but I think at least for a time was able to get that included in their policy resolutions, which is really how the American Farm Bureau Federation kind of does business at the national level. So, we have seen benefits to working together with them, but it's complicated. I
would add, I'd back up what Maddie says. We've had in New York State some NOFA members who have been very active and held positions up at the top. The problem, however, is the national organization goes its own way. And overall, I think we have to realize that Farm Bureau can come to a state legislature or to Congress and point to so many million members. But what they don't say is those members are a lot of times insurance buyers. That's their main business. And so they sell home insurance, farm insurance, a whole wide range of insurances. And the minute you are a purchaser of one of those, you are automatically counted as a Farm Bureau member. So their claims are soft in terms of who they represent to begin with. They are strong enough at the state level in New York State that they have a foot in the door every time. And for a long time, organic was kind of kept out of that. When Kirsten Gillibrand was our local representative for New York State in the Saratoga area, she put together an agricultural advisory committee, and organic was invited to the table. And there was some grumbling going on from the Farm Bureau members at this point, and this is back in the 80s and 90s, saying, what are they doing here? And she said, gentlemen, Organic is at the table because they represent a significant part of New York State agriculture. And if anybody doesn't really go down with that, they're welcome to leave the meeting. So she was very clear about that. And now as senator from New York State, she's a very strong advocate of organic agriculture. So we try and not get into we-they battles with Farm Bureau, but sometimes it's impossible to avoid. And one of the ways around this has been state by state going through soil health initiatives. Instead of using the O word, and unfortunately, organic is still a sticking point for a number of larger organizations, we can all kind of agree on soil health as a really good ecosystem services way to go forward. And we have a person working closely with NOFA Interstate Policy Committee who has been very successful working on the national level, state by state, getting soil health legislation passed. And a number of the NOFA states have already done that. And so there's ways of making progress without hitting our heads against the wall. But at the same time, it's really important to realize that the Farm Bureau is a prime member of FACA, for instance. And they're really going for the carbon credits route at the federal level.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I know that there's a lot packed in there, so I appreciate you breaking that down, and that certainly merits further solutions-oriented strategizing there. I'm looking at the time. We're at about 90 minutes now, and I just want to see if there's any other final questions or comments. Otherwise,
I have a small plug, which maybe
Please.
this is something that doesn't need to be plugged. But there, in terms of, again, like to Bunny's question, this isn't really, this doesn't go to the academic research side of things, but in terms of storytelling, and I think that conversation that you raised, Marty, around kind of visioning and how we stay motivated and excited to work toward these solutions. I have been listening to this podcast, which many folks may already know about, that's called How to Save a Planet. And I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. I find it to be such a breath of fresh air in terms of both like the quality of the discussions and the research that really does inform the discussions, and also just the realistic solutions oriented nature of the conversations. And I just find it to be the way that I really want to think about climate change and how we respond to it. Like, let's get really sober and understand, the research and sort of, for lack of a better term, like how screwed we are, right? And let's understand what the real potential is in all of these solutions. And they have an episode about regenerative farming. And I always sort of cringe when I'm listening to a conversation in the beginning about regenerative farming, because I expect to just be disappointed. And this is one example where I was really excited about how they handled it, and they did a great job with it. So I'd recommend that episode in particular, but the whole podcast is, if you're into climate solutions, it's a great one to check out.
very good. Thank you. Any other plugs, Steve? We good?
No, just thank you everybody for being here today. And we've got our work cut out for us. But again, what else is there to do?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
This is the work with a capital W. So thank you all for helping getting us oriented on the landscape. And this is sure to be a great resource. I know I'll be watching it again to get to go over some stuff. But before we wrap up, I do want to mention we do have a survey that would be very, very helpful to get your feedback on that. I'll be pasting that in the chat. And don't forget, we also have the vendor marketplace online. Again, we'll paste the link in there, but please visit our vendor marketplace and find some generous discount codes and valuable information from our vendors. We do have the auction that's still going. We have some incredible items to bid on in our online auction. You can visit the link again in the chat. And for those applying this towards continuing education credits, Attendance in the NOFA Summer Conference fulfills all 4 continuing education hours for AOL CPs. So please keep a record of your attendance to submit at the next reaccreditation cycle. And the program book will be updated with workshop links every day. So make sure to refresh daily. You can find your next workshop link. We got one more session today right there. And you can also sign up for text alerts to remind you when our conference programming is beginning each day. So we'll be be putting those links in the chat here, but we'll leave the room open for a few more minutes. If folks want to chat, feel free to come on screen, get your mics hot there. And this is the after workshop mingling. So thank you again. I'll post those links in.
I got to ask a question. Do you think it would be better to include some of the customer community to have opinions on it too?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that quite.
I was wondering, like, for organic, do we need the customers of organic to actually be involved too?
Consumers, you mean?
Yeah, so the question I believe is regarding organic climate solutions. Do we need the involvement of the consumers as well? And I mean, I would say right off the bat that the consumers are part of that. I mean, NOFA Mass and the NOFA organizations, where it's not just farmers, it's gardeners, growers, consumers, landscapers, foodies, food activists, and we're very much involved through these organizations and through our national partners in the climate conversation. But I don't know if Steve or Matt, if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, I'm actually a college student attending because I've always done a lot of I'm in New Jersey doing a lot of gardening. So I just was like, is it really important to like, for climate change, would it be important to like work with the environment as well for climate change? Like,
You talk about the environmental movement?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really get into coalition building so much in this workshop, but I know, you know, as on the NOFA Mass side of things, I'm the policy director, and we've been working very closely with the Green New Deal, now the Mass Renews Alliance, which is multiple, you know, stakeholders from labor and youth climate organizing to environmental justice and food security, food justice movements, getting everyone at the table, and you know, NOFA is there to help hold up organic and agriculture as a solution. But yeah, absolutely, we need to be working as and with, and we are. I mean, we are a part of the environmental movement, always have been since the inception of NOFA, I believe.
Yeah, and I would say too, to the part of kind of consumer aspect of your question, I feel like, you know, consumers have a role, particularly in sort of asking questions, right, about where their food is coming from. And, you know, not every consumer and just sort of average person is going to be able to get deeply involved in, say, a food policy council, a local ag commission, like really direct advocacy in that sense. But I think every consumer can go to their grocery store and say, hey, can you tell me where these tomatoes came from? Can you tell me why you're not sourcing your tomatoes from the farm down the street? And what could I do to encourage you to do that? And these are my values, and this is what I want to support. You know, just personally as a consumer myself, like I get really frustrated not being able to find organically fed, you know, meat and eggs at my stores, and instead finding a lot of like non-GMO products, which really are not, you know, living the standards that I want. So I think just asking a lot of questions and really pressing your retailers in that area is one thing.
Thank you. Because I noticed lately I'm finding garlic and they all come from China.
Not my garlic.
Yeah, because I noticed, like, I go to ShopRite in like New Jersey, and it's always like made in China garlic. That's what I always see. So, but,
you know, that's a really good point, because internationally, you know, the U.S. really sources a lot of food from other places in the world, and there's a tremendous market that our local farmers are not able to access. And it's because the big agribusiness corporations are multinational. And if they can get a cheaper product from China, then that's what's going to be coming into the stores. And they're the middleman that's making that happen. And that's why it's very important to deal with local farmers, local food, join your local NOFA, and work as a consumer wherever you are in that. As a student, you have great effect on other fellow students to really spread that word. So there's a lot of positive things that can be done on the local level.
Thank you.
Well, before we wrap up, if Maddie and Steve, if you want to put in the chat, best way for folks to get in contact with any further questions or ideas in building in this work. You know, normally we'd be able to swap cards or information at the end of the workshop here. Yeah, I'll say I'm very much looking forward to next year, hopefully being in person, but I am very much appreciating the ability to connect with folks wherever they are and to get these great downloads. And yeah, thank you, Maddie, thank you, Steve, for you know, putting this together and this great all this great information. And thank you everyone here for joining us, and for those tuning in later on watching this. Yeah, let's continue to connect and hold up organic as a solution to the climate crisis.
Hey, thank you, Marty. Great job.
Thanks, Marty.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.